And welcome to the regular Friday program of the City Club of Portland. My name is Bill Lesh and I'm your president, and I'd like to welcome all of you who are not out at Hillsborough Airport this morning welcoming the Blazers back from Detroit. We have an exciting program today. I'd like to introduce two new members to you. If you would join or hold your applause until I introduce them both, I would like them to stand. We have Doris Bjorn, who is Sales and Marketing Manager of Oregon Waste Systems, Inc., and Pamela Erickson, Assistant Administrator for Employment and Training, Oregon Employment Division. Welcome both of you to the City Club of Portland. I'd like to thank Richard Daniels and Jane Menard for recruiting those new members and urge any of you who are not members to consider joining. We have a number of exciting programs coming up in the near and a little further distant future, including Neil Goldschmidt's swan song, if you will, in December. We will have one of the gubernatorial debates. There's going to be anywhere from 2 to 900, as I understand the discussions between the two candidates. One of those will be here at the City Club. We will also have in 3 weeks John Frohnmeyer, who is, as you all know, in the midst of trying to get the arts funded back in Washington, D.C. So I would hope that you would consider membership, and there are materials on your tables. Please take them with you and consider joining City Club. A number of announcements very quickly. We have several good open forums coming up. The first will be Monday, June 11th. It will be planned by our Land Use and Transportation Standing Committee, and it is entitled, Do We Need to Expand the Urban Growth Boundary Now? Probably for some of those Californians we keep hearing about. Speaking at that program will be Keith Bartholomew, staff attorney with 1,000 Friends of Oregon, Charlie Hales, Vice President of Governmental Relations for the Home Builders Association of Metropolitan Portland, Mike Ragsdale, a Metro Counselor from District 1, and Patty Tillett, who is Head of Urban Planning and Design at Zimmer Gunsel Frasca. That meeting will be from noon to 1:30 at the U.S. Bank Tower, 26th floor, conference rooms B and C. It's free and open to the public. Also free and open to the public will be another open forum on June 13th, Wednesday, sponsored by Human Services, Law, and Public Safety Standing Committee. It will feature Tony Pallarmini, Superintendent, David Douglas School District, and Norma Jager, Manager, Alcohol and Drug Program, Multnomah County, discussing where do we go from here. This is the final program of a series focusing on alcohol and drugs and children. That will be, as I mentioned, Wednesday, June 13th, noon to 1:30 at the U.S. Bancorp Tower, 26th floor, rooms B and C. And in our next Friday program here, we have a program in our Fast Forward to the Year 2000 series featuring David Brewster, who is founder of New Pacific and publisher of Seattle Weekly. He will be discussing the dawning of the New Pacific era and its future and effects on the Northwest. That will be here at the Benson Hotel in the Mayfair Room. And then finally, in 2 weeks, Mick Scott, who is chairman of the American Advertising Museum, will present a review of America's ads and the business that created it. I might give you a little warning if you're used to listening on the radio. This is a very visual program. It will involve slides and video of many of the most fascinating ad campaigns for the past 25 or 30 years. It will be a very interesting and exciting program, and I hope that you will come and attend at the Benson. It will be a little difficult to see this one over your radio. Our board host today, seated at my far left, is Alan Oliver, who is a member of the Board of Governors, chair of the program committee, and president of Home Accents. Alan will have the privilege of asking the first question today. We have a new procedure we're trying out to encourage people to stand at the mic. Our first from the floor question will be from Mary Kramer, who is president-elect and also marketing coordinator for behavioral health services for Southwest Washington Medical Center. After the first 2 questions, you are all welcome as City Club members to ask questions of our speaker. We give preference to oral questions. There will be a mic at the center of the room. If you are shy, you may submit a written question. There are forms on your tables. Please hold them up, and the staff will pick them up and bring them forward. And as always, questions at the City Club end in a question mark. Boy, quite crowded. The Cold War is over. At least that's what many are proclaiming. And with it, the end of the need of huge Defense Department spending, also according to a number of different people. And in fact, Congress and the executive branch, the President's office and the Department of Defense are debating how much those cuts should be, not whether there should be cutbacks in the where should we spend those limited dollars? As you read the articles speculating on the amounts that may be cut out of Defense Department spending and used for defense of the United States, a growing list of people are proclaiming their interest and needs in this money. And that is, in fact, going to become an even greater portion of the debate. Our speaker today will discuss this change in federal spending and what it may mean to us here in Oregon. Elizabeth Furse is director of the Oregon Peace Institute, which was founded in 1985 and has as its goal to educate Oregonians on issues of peace and justice. Ms. Furse was born in Kenya and graduated from Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. She has worked for the American Friends Service Committee, Oregon Legal Services Native American Program, and in 1986 became director of the Oregon Peace Institute. She has been a guest lecturer at a number of universities and colleges around the United States and is currently very active in her role as director of the Institute in making presentations around the Northwest. Will you help me welcome Elizabeth Furse, sharing her views on the peace dividend and what it can do for Oregon.
Thank you. Of course, it's a great honor to be here in the City Club because this is such a prestigious place. It's a place where decisions are made, where people think of new ideas, and of course, this is such an exciting time anyway in the world that to be where people are thinking is always terrific for me, and I thank you for inviting me. I don't usually do a little spiel about the Oregon Peace Institute, but there happens to be 5 board members here, and I probably wouldn't be employed at the end of this if I didn't tell you a little bit about this organization, which I greatly love. The Oregon Peace Institute was started in '85, and in '87 we opened in the Galleria in a shopping center. And people said, you can't open a peace institute in a shopping center. And we said, well, why not? And we did. And last year, 25,000 people came through our doors and bought merchandise and found out about all the organizations around working on peace. And we feel good about that because lots of peace organizations feel they've done something wrong if more than 5 people stumble in a month. So we're feeling great about that. Our goal is to reach out to new audiences, not those who are already convinced about peace, but new audiences. And under that goal, we are in a shopping center. We do a program called the Peace Channel, which reaches 5.5 million homes around the country every week with programming on cable access on peace and nonviolent conflict resolution. We hosted an economic conversion conference this year jointly with World Affairs Council and Rotary District 510, and we intend to do more of those things. We are going to Khabarovsk, the area of Khabarovsk. We've been invited by the Peace Committee there, and we will be taking the first state Oregon bridge to Khabarovsk. We had a summer festival, and 35,000 people came down to listen to music and hear about peace. And we'll be doing that again this year. Today, I hope to talk to you about 3 things, about the problem that the escalating arms race has brought to us economically. I'm not going to talk very much about the weapons, because I think you know quite a bit about that. I'm going to talk about what the benefits of a peace dividend might be to not only Oregon's economy, but to Multnomah County, to the city of Portland, and to you yourselves. And I'm going to try and show you, I hope, that if we would approach looking for a peace dividend using economic conversion as one of the steps towards that peace dividend, we can realize a real cut in military spending and a real benefit to Oregon and to the rest of the country. People ask me, well, what is a peace dividend? And I guess there is many definitions of a peace dividend as there are people talking about it. But I like to define a peace dividend as the saving that would occur if we were to cut back military spending and take those savings and put them into something else. Now, the debate will be what is the something else, but I think we have to get beyond where we are to where we can begin to make those decisions. One of the something else's could be the deficit. One could be education, environmental protection, whatever we chose. I'd like to open with a quote from a five-star general. You will find that peace activists constantly quote five-star generals or admirals. We're wonderful at that. But Dwight D. Eisenhower said, "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired, signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who are hungry and not fed, those who are cold and not clothed. The world in arms is not spending money alone," he said. "It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, and the hope of its children." He went on to say, "A world at arms is hanging from a cross of iron." I want to start off by making it clear to say that I'm not proposing unilateral total disarmament. What I am going to be talking about is how we can make a sensible shift from military, the overweighted military budget, to a civilian budget that would meet both military and civilian needs with the limited resources which we have. I believe that with absolutely no threat to our national security, we could very sensibly cut the military budget by 50%, and we could do it right away. David Stockman has testified before the Congress that 10 to 30% of the military budget, he believes, is wasted on waste, mismanagement, and fraud, and he testified that he thought that that 30% should be immediately cut from the budget. Well, 30% of a $300 billion budget is $100 billion. Then if you cut NATO by half, you would cut another $75 billion. And as you think about the missiles that NATO is using, the short-range missiles, which are designed to go from West Germany to East Germany, and then you think about unified Germany, it makes you wonder a little bit about why we're spending so much. So to paraphrase the man who said, a billion here and a billion there, and pretty soon you're talking about real money, I think we could look at some real cuts in military spending. In 10 short years, the budget has gone, the military portion of the budget has gone from $100 billion a year to $319 billion. And much of that growth has been accompanied by mismanagement and by fraud. Senator William Cohen, who is a Republican senator, serves on the Armed Services Committee from Maine, he said this in 1984, "We have a kind of looting mentality amongst defense contractors. It's a get what you can while nobody's watching the store mentality." And he went on to say that he thought it was criminal. While the military budget has grown by this $200 billion, the deficit has risen by approximately $150 billion each year. And it is presently estimated that 80% of the deficit is in fact military driven. And the interest that we pay each year on that military portion of the deficit is now reaching about $181 billion a year. What has been the effect of this unprecedented military growth? What has it been on the nation, on the state, the county, the city, and on you? The federal cost has been about $2 trillion. That $2 trillion has been spent over the past 10 years on the Pentagon. Now, often I should say that there are these sort of hidden costs that don't actually have a Pentagon hook on them. For instance, the $1.2 billion that President Bush has asked for as an increase in the drug war, $1.2 billion that he's asking for. You should know that not one penny of that increase is going to local communities, but 70% of that increase is slated for the Pentagon. So you will find Pentagon spending in the drug war. You will find Pentagon spending in energy. If you take the Social Security portion out of the budget, the main budget, and look just at the tax dollar that you spend when you send in your income tax, 52 cents out of every dollar that you send to the United States government, 52 cents is going into military. At the same time, only 2 cents are going into education, 2 cents into environmental protection, and a huge 8 cents into health. So you can see that we're not talking about a Graham-Rudman even budget, we're talking about a heavily weighted Pentagon budget. In the same 10 years that this military budget grew, the United States went from being the largest creditor nation in the world to what it is presently, which is the largest debtor nation in the world. And that debt has been driven by our increased obsession with military spending. In the same time, the United States has lost its edge with Japan and West Germany. Mr. Iacocca says we are approaching what he terms a colony status. About the only thing which we have left to sell is the land itself and the natural resources on it. Business people are seeing a tremendous effect of this military spending, because 10 years ago we were spending about 45% of all our federal research dollars on the military. That has gone to 72%, and therefore we are not producing or researching those kinds of products that people want to buy. I remember when Jesse Jackson was speaking here at City Club, and he asked everybody to raise their hand who had a VCR, and the whole audience raised their hand, and then he asked everybody to raise their hand who owned an MX missile, and nobody did. And that's what we're doing. Japan is producing VCRs, and we are producing MX missiles, and everybody wants a VCR, and nobody wants an MX missile. But there have been some other terrible problems that have occurred as a result of this military spending, and one has been, I think, if we look at the drug addiction, the alcohol addiction, homelessness, the social programs, violence, I think that if you look at those addictive and violent behaviors, you are looking at, in fact, an effect of our having put our faith into military and into a violent type of budget item. It has skewed our military, our social value. I think of it as a society addicted, the government is addicted to arms, and we, unfortunately, as citizens, have become codependent, enablers to that addiction. Of course, we're lucky that there are some leaders who are not allowing themselves to take that enabling role. Senator Mark Hatfield, when he introduced the Bread for the World resolution, it's a resolution to cut military spending by 50% worldwide. He had this to say: "We seem to have lost sight of the fact that every dollar we spend on bombs and bullets mean that we are underfunding programs to meet national, desperate human needs. Healthcare, education, the war on drugs, low-income housing, AIDS research, all those things that are part of our national defense." In 1987, Secretary of State Barbara Roberts spoke at a forum, and what she talked about was the effect on Oregon of the military spending, the budget. That was at then it was a mere $300 billion we were spending. And she pointed out that when it's $300 billion, the state of Oregon ships out to the Pentagon approximately $2.1 billion. And we get back about 5.5% in some secondary contracts. And she asked us at that forum to just think for a moment that the state budget for most services is about $2 billion. And she said, think if we cut the budget by half, think what we could do with another $1 billion in Oregon. And that is the cost. That is the cost foregone. That could have come back in terms of assistance to cities or counties, assistance to federal law enforcement, or to services that we care about, education. It is always amazing to me to think that the justification for all this is national security, and yet we have no money for law enforcement. We have no money for health education. Today, the federal government announced that it was sorry, but it probably couldn't fund the 75% of the rapid transit that it had promised because it didn't have enough money. However, today we also put into space a secret military payload of a rocket, a huge satellite which has gone up into space. Now, if we think of those both as transportation, we are choosing to transport a military payload which could well carry plutonium or the West rapid transit. Again, the clear choices that we are taking. But I don't want you to be too depressed about the way your money is being spent, because there are certain things that are really worthwhile. One of them is in the F-16 fighter pilot, which has a coffee pot, which you'll be pleased to know. Although it does cost you $12,000 each coffee pot, you'll be pleased to know that the reason it does is because it can withstand impact. What that means is when the plane crashes, there'll be a hot cup of coffee for the pilot. We only hope that they are employing pilots who can withstand impact. Now, another cost that I think we have to look at is the danger of the weapons themselves. What have we bought? What have we bought with our money? We have now presently, between the Soviet Union and the United States, 50,000 nuclear warheads. And that doesn't mean anything to anybody. It doesn't mean anything to me until I translate it. It is translated to be 1,200,000 Hiroshimas. We have the firepower to destroy Hiroshima 1,200,000 times. A sea-launched cruise missile has on it the capacity to destroy, to do the same firepower of 12 Hiroshimas. And I hope you all feel really comfortable about the fact that there may be 8 of them in the harbor right now on the USS New Jersey. What has been the cost to Multnomah County? Well, Multnomah County has had to deal with rising costs, rising needs, because poverty and homelessness are beginning to become more and more a problem for our local communities. And as we don't get drug money, it goes to the Pentagon. They have to deal with these things. Federal revenue sharing has been cut from $55.5 billion a year to $15.5 billion. And that's what the county is having to deal with, is a cut in these federal revenue dollars, picking up more and more the services necessary for its citizens. In just 5 years, the city of Portland, which 5 years ago received $8.9 million in federal revenue sharing, has been slated in 1990 to receive $150,000, despite the fact that drugs, homelessness, hopelessness are endemic on the streets of our cities. So the cost has been taking away from the cities, taking away from the counties. But let's get down to you and I. What was the cost to us, just in money, just plain dollars? Last year, the Pentagon budget cost you, each of one of you, if you are an average taxpayer, it cost you $3,000. And you'll be pleased to know that $1,600 of that was for NATO. Now, in West Germany, they have free university tuition. They also have universal health care, national health care. They have daycare. But they don't have to have a huge military budget because we are picking up the cost for them. So that $1,600 that you couldn't give to your child in university, sending your child to a university last year, was spent in West Germany putting short-range missiles that can now fire on East Germany. Another cost, I think, is the psychological cost. I'm sure you don't go to bed each night thinking that some Russian missile is going to come flying through the back door, but you may very well think each night, you wonder whether some criminal might come through. Well, we've had to cut our law enforcement budget. The law enforcement budget for the city of Portland is about $58 million a year. And if you look at the B-2 bomber, that has glorious cost to it of $580 million. That's if they come in at cost, and of course we know they're already above cost, and we want to buy 130 of those. So the cost of one B-2 bomber could fund Portland's law enforcement for 10 years. But instead, we are cutting. A friend of mine called the police the other day, and they were told, "We're sorry, the jails are full, don't bother to call us." And that's not because they don't want to do a good job, but because they are being restricted every day by these lack of dollars. So what's for us to do now? Well, of course, the good news is that we can do a lot. First, I think the first and most important thing we must do is believe that the Cold War is over, and it is over. The Cold War is gone. We must redefine national security. It's absolutely vital that we stop thinking of national security as how many weapons we have. Mayor Agrons of California, and interestingly enough, he's from Irvine, California, and Irvine is one of the few cities that is fortunate to receive some return from the great military dollars. Of course, I'm looking for his quote, so I'll have to now remember what it was. What he said was, he said, we mayors are concerned about national security. But he said, we look on national security as a healthy, strong community. And he said, our national security has been breached. As a city governor, a mayor, he feels that the national security of Irvine has been breached. So we must then demand a peace dividend. We must ask for passage of sweeping economic conversion legislation. This is a time of enormous opportunity. Obviously, I don't have to tell you that every 20 minutes the world changes. By the time we go out of this room, it will have changed again, because things are changing so rapidly. Everything has changed, and therefore we can change everything. We no longer have to use the old way of thinking. As Einstein said, we must change our way of thinking, or else we drift towards unparalleled catastrophe. There are an enormous number of local initiatives which are occurring around the country, but I'm very pleased to say that in Portland and Multnomah County, there's a peace dividend task force has been set up by the county and the city to look at the cost of military spending to the local communities, and then bring to them these costs so that they will understand it, and then ask from the citizens what they want the national security priorities to be. Imagine a moment where Business Week and the People's Daily World have the same headline. They did. Both of them called for a peace dividend. And Business Week on June 12th, and that was before the wall fell, said that a mere 4% decrease in military spending each year by the year 2000 would put a surplus into the United States budget, Treasury. In fact, they said, so staggering would it be, and I quote, that you would have to assume some redistribution through tax cuts. Too bad. Then on December 11th, Business Week had a story, which was, its cover story was the peace economy. And what it said was, at the end, it had this wonderful quote, America's leaders have an opportunity to demonstrate that the United States and the rest of the world to them that the policy of peace can be the politics of prosperity. Now, obviously, after pouring all our resources for 40 years into military spending, if we suddenly changed that, just redirected those resources, we would have massive dislocation. What we have to do is we have to put in economic conversion planning, which allows for a rational transition. There is presently legislation on economic conversion, but I'd like to tell you first that I think we need to be aware that the Pentagon has done almost no planning. When it cuts a contract, it cuts the contract, and people are left without employment. It closes a base, and people are left, the community is left, and in many cases, communities have done a terrific job of switching. Sacramento did a wonderful job of changing because they planned but did not have any federal assistance to plan. Economic conversion sets up federal assistance mechanisms. Economic conversion basically has three functions. To change production facilities from military to civilian. That also pulls away the power of war-making institutions, but it's to change from military production to civilian. Two, to reverse the erosion of competence in production. One of the problems that has occurred is that so much military spending maximizes cost and minimizes efficiency, because if you are on a production that's cost plus, of course, the more it costs, the more you make. So instead of the way we used to do business, now we maximize cost, minimize efficiency. So reversing the erosion of competence is another goal of economic conversion. And to offer employment opportunities in beneficial institutions. A lot of people don't want to work in war-making factories, but they have very few opportunities. House Bill 101, which was introduced by Ted Weiss of New York and now has 65 sponsors. House Bill 101, I think, embodies most of the beneficial and essential parts of true economic conversion. It's known as the Defense Economic Conversion Act, and I'll tell you what it does. Because it's gaining in the House, there will be a companion bill, we understand, at some point in the Senate, and there are two other economic conversion bills, but I think House Bill 101 will be joined with those two. It establishes a Defense Adjustment Council, and that council has a certain functions. It will provide 1 year pre-notification for closure of bases or for stopping of a contract. 1 year pre-notification is not very much, but it's better than 2 weeks, which they're getting now. It will identify non-defense products and policies. Now that's where Oregon is going to do very well. It's going to identify projects that are non-defense related that could become priorities nationally. And I think we have some very important things that we could bring to that. It will establish a clearinghouse for such projects and will distribute a guidelines handbook. The Title II of the Act would provide funds for any community substantially affected by defense cutbacks. Planning, expertise, that sort of thing would be provided to the community. Number 3, the Title III is that any facility that employs over 100 people in a defense contract, any defense contractor who employs over 100 people, that contractor, that factory would have to set up a council made up of half labor and half management, and that council would have to determine what that factory could do to set up an alternative contract within 2 years of any contract being cut back by the Pentagon. So it allows for the kind of planning that comes from the ground up. It allows that factory and those workers to make plans for what they would prefer to do should that military contract disappear. Displaced workers would be eligible for adjustment benefits for up to 2 years. And here's the thing that I think is really quite amazing. They put in this bill that anybody who had worked for more than 5 years in a managerial or technical position had to take retraining, recognizing that it's very difficult for them to work back in the commercial field after 5 years in defense contracting. It would then establish a fund, and that fund would come out 1.25% out of all defense contracts would be put into that fund by the contractor, and the federal government would have to estimate 10% of what it saw as its savings from contracts that would be cut back. Now, new industries, obviously we could dream from now till forever, but just think about public housing. We have not renewed our public housing stock for 8 years. It's diminished, and we're not replacing it. Oregon could do very well if it began to produce public housing with its wonderful resources that we have here. Nutrition programs. We are an agricultural state. We could begin to get involved in those programs, and Oregon, because it has not spent its time getting geared up into military contracts, would be much more flexible, much more creative. And I think that we in Oregon could very quickly become a leader in developing these new projects. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that every year we shortfall about $15 billion in repair and maintenance of our infrastructure, and other people think it's higher. The National Governors Association just yesterday came out with a report that said in many states 90% of bridges are dangerous. We just haven't rebuilt them. We haven't rebuilt our airports. Now, what would happen if you took just $15 billion? $15 billion and put it into this core infrastructure. The chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank estimates that if you only took that $15 billion and reapplied it, the productivity growth rate in this country would rise by 0.3%. Not only would that happen, but of course we'd have safe roads to drive on, we'd have airports that we weren't afraid to fly out of. I'm afraid to fly out on anything, but I particularly want the airport to be safe. And so what we would be doing is not only producing money in our economy, but we would also be taking care of our own security. I think that it's very unlikely that Congress is just going to rush forward and cut the military budget by 25%. I think just the sheer weight of inertia, the huge Pentagon lobby, there are 2 floors of that huge building that are filled with lobbyists. The fact that for 40 years we have had this sort of hype that to be anti-weapons is to be anti-America, to be somehow naive. I think it's naive to keep building and building and building weapons that can destroy this world hundreds of times over. But I think that weight and that inertia is going to require enormous effort from us. And I think that we have to not be fooled by asking for small cuts. Remember the $180 billion that Mr. Cheney said we were going to cut from the military budget? Well, that's a hype. That's not a real $180 billion. That's $180 billion out of a $600 billion dream budget. You dream $600 billion, and then you say, well, cut $180. It's not a real cut. We have to ask for real cuts. And what will happen if we don't? I think what will happen if we don't is very frightening. I think, first of all, the Pentagon is very quickly going to discover a new enemy. And I was looking at an article in the Oregonian the other day, and what the headline said should give us pause. The military wants bilingual Hispanic members of the Army. Why? Well, I think it's obvious. I think we are developing a new enemy. I think if we don't quickly move to a real peace dividend, real economic conversion, the military industrial complex, which you will remember we were warned against by a 5-star general. He said, beware the military industrial complex, not just because of the money it uses, but because it militarizes our society. It overcomes the local elected officials' concerns for peace and safety and health of their people. As we more militarize our society and our economy, so we lose our democracy. And I think that our real civilian needs are going to be sacrificed more and more to military greed. I'm almost at the end, but I want to close almost with something that I heard 2 days ago on the news. And for me, it was the whole problem. A little girl, a little Oregonian, 2 years old, her adoptive parents were being held for the torture and murder of this small child. And the CSD was asked, how could that have happened? How could it have been an adoptive child that nobody monitored this child? And the spokesperson said, well, our budget has been cut, and it's been cut, and it's been cut again, and we don't have enough caseworkers. And I would say to you that that little girl, whose name was Jennifer was a victim of war. She was killed as much by war as if a bomb had gone off or she'd been killed by a bullet, because to me it seems that her security was breached because we chose to fund the Pentagon, but we didn't choose to fund a social service agency looking after those who are the most vulnerable in our society. The Berlin Wall didn't fall because America had 30,000 nuclear weapons. It fell because the people decided that they'd had enough of the yoke of dictatorship. And as a former South African, I can tell you that the South African government did not meet with the African National Congress because overnight Mr. Verwoerd had seen the light of democracy. They met because the people of South Africa had decided they would no longer live under the yoke of apartheid. I think that we can choose peace and prosperity. I think that we can choose to lift the yoke of the arms race and the fear of nuclear weapons and the stranglehold of a militarized economy. And I think we can do it now, and I think it's time to begin. Thank you.
We now move to the question part of our program. The microphone is being placed in the center of the room. I will remind you that questions are City Club members' privilege only, and oral questions take precedent over written questions. If you do have a written question, please hold it up so the staff can bring it forward. We will have two prepared questions, the first from Alan Oliver, our board host. Alan?
Elizabeth, on the radio this morning, I heard an interview with a young man who is stationed on the battleship New Jersey. He was mightily offended by the demonstration that the Greenpeace activists had carried out on the way of the ship into our waters. And he said, we don't deserve this treatment. We're not bad people. We're just sailors. And I was wondering, the work of the Oregon Peace Institute, how you would explain the effects of the peace dividend on the life of this young man, what kind of methods you use, and what you would say to him.
First of all, I think we would totally agree with him that he is not a bad person, and that so often our young people have been caught up in employment, again, with the military because there have been very few opportunities for young people to find employment. So our my first reaction would be to, yes, say to him, of course, we understand that what you're doing you believe in, and you may not have had too many opportunities to do something else. What the peace dividend will do is provide for you lots more education opportunities, lots more employment opportunities, opportunities to perhaps develop yourself more than you might on a battleship. I think it should be very, very clear that, in fact, the protest was the protest around the dangers of the weapons that might have been on board. The New Jersey is equipped to carry launch 8 Sea launch cruise missiles, and the concern was that there was no planning done to protect the citizens of Oregon should there have been an accident on board, because the United States refused to tell the local jurisdictions whether there was these weapons on board. But I think the young man needs to know that there are far more opportunities available to people in education and in employment than just those provided by the military.
Mary Kramer.
Thank you, Bill. My impression is, when you talk to people, that everybody believes in peace. It's sort of like apple pie and motherhood. What are we going to do to ignite the American people so that peace becomes a priority issue and overrides our fear of not having national security, our fear of others, our fear of the unknown?
I think we have to broaden the debate. I think it is such an incredible time. I was invited to go to Grants Pass Rotary to speak, and I don't want to be facetious, but I don't think they let peaceniks into Grants Pass. But there was this great yearning to get this information. Business people are looking for this information. How can we get out of this terrible problem with the deficit? I think we need to increase the education that is taking place, and I think we are in that perfect moment in time when, for once, for the first time in many, many years, it's okay to be strongly for peace. It's okay to strongly suggest that national security rests somewhere other than in weapons. So I think that that's our project now, is to get out the education as broadly as possible.
Michael Wells, I'm a member. Your job is to get information out to people. For the average citizen listening to the radio, living in Grants Pass, who doesn't come to the speech, how can those people get information that's valid information to make decisions? Cheney says we're going to cut 180 million. Somebody else says we're going to cut 6%. How do average people get information to make up their minds about this?
Well, first of all, they join the Oregon Peace Institute. No. Well, they do that. They join the many peace organizations that are putting out phenomenal information. The Center for Defense Information, which is an organization in Washington, D.C., and which has on its board of directors every admiral and general ever retired. They wait till they retire, and then they're on the board of that. We need to go to our newspaper editors. We need to say, look, people are vitally interested in this information. They want it. Why isn't it there where we can find it easily? But it is becoming more so. I was down in Ashland, and the Ashland Tiding, each day I was there, had some new wonderful piece of information about economic conversion and the change. So I think it's changing, Michael, and I think we need to just increase what we're doing, and we need to talk to each other. And when some Cold War warrior says, hey, we need this stuff, you say, no, wait a minute. This is what we need. This is what national security is about.
Susan Hammer, City Club member. I noticed on this year's tax return there is a place where people can check off a donation to the Oregon Peace Institute. Can you explain how that occurred and what that money will be used for?
Yes, Senator Jeanette Hamby, who is on our board. We have a wonderful board. Senator Hamby, Judy Bauman, Congressman Aucoin, Senator Hatfield, Barbara Roberts. I mean, it just goes on, and Susan Hammer. We have a wonderful board, and Jeanette suggested that a great way to not only take care of funding some programs, but to get education out would be to put a checkoff on the income tax form. And what that money will do, as you check off for the Oregon Peace Institute this year or next year, if like me, you haven't filed your income tax form yet, but we hope you have. And what you can do is you'd make a checkoff, and that money will go to fund projects in Oregon, only in Oregon, that deal with youth and nonviolent conflict resolution. That means that we will have some programs in Oregon Peace Institute, but say the Youth Gangs Task Force, for instance, which is dealing with youth and violence and all sorts of problems on the street, say they had a program, they might apply to the Oregon Peace Institute for funding out of that tax checkoff. So it is statewide, and we want to fund particularly startup programs teaching nonviolent conflict resolution.
Yes, my name is Charlotte Schwartz, and I'm a board member of the Burnside Projects, which is a homeless agency. Quite often we hear our street kids say, why should I bother? They're going to blow up the earth anyhow. What kind of impact do you think that this has on American children?
Well, I'm hoping it's going to get better, but actually the effect is horrifying. It is estimated by psychologists that 7 out of 10 children do not believe they will grow to adulthood. 7 out of 10. So obviously, if you feel that way, why wouldn't you take drugs? Why wouldn't you overindulge in alcohol? Why wouldn't you drop out of school? If you thought that your government had so turned its back on you that you could not become an adult, that they cared, as a little girl said the other day to Dr. Helen Caldecott, it sounds as though they fear more their enemies than they love the children. Well, that's true. We do fear our enemies more than we love the children. However, I do want to tell you about an event I was at where there were a whole bunch of parents and a psychologist, and the psychologist was telling about what had happened with children and how depressed they are. And the psychologist said, however, I was at a school and I was asking children what they felt. They were 7-year-olds, and these 7-year-olds all thought that there would be a nuclear war, except one of them. And she thought, of course, being a psychologist, she thought, well, this poor child is probably blocking its fear. But when she talked a little bit more to the child said, no, there won't be a nuclear war. And she said, why? And he said, because my mother and father go to meetings. If we don't even stop the war, at least our children are going to feel better. So I think we should get active and involved.
Mary McCarthy, member. You kind of touched on my question already. All of the senators and people who make decisions about military issues were children at one time, and if we can have the Just Say No program for drugs that starts in kindergarten, why can't we have a similar thing for peace? And my question is, what are you doing to help develop that in early childhood and in the schools?
Oregon has been fortunate in that the state legislature passed a bill about 1987 to develop what they call the nuclear age curricula. And it's K through 12, and it's to do just that, to try and teach children about what the problems of war are. Now, unfortunately, it isn't perhaps as strong as we would like, but it's a very good first step. The Oregon Peace Institute has developed a curricula guide for teachers in the elementary school, because we thought, like you did, that it's very important that small children learn this stuff first. They have to learn not to take a 2x4 to their friend's head when they have a problem. They have to learn that you can resolve conflict on the playground, in the schoolroom, before you can resolve conflict nationally, internationally. So we have developed this curricula guide, which is available to all teachers in Oregon for free, and we would like, under the tax checkoff money, to develop more of that teaching in the schools. There are some wonderful teachers doing that. We were just 2 weeks ago asked to teach this same kind of subject to Japanese students who had come here with the Tokyo College of Commerce. So we've reached beyond Oregon. We're now in Tokyo, and they're coming to us. Conflict resolution teaching is becoming extremely important to our schools, and I think we'll see more of it. But you need to go to your school boards, and you need to encourage your school boards to bring this kind of education, allow it down into your schools, because many school boards are blocking this kind of education, afraid that it's going to teach, heaven knows, pacifism.
I'm Gus Mattersdorf. I'm a member. If I may, I'd like to move the discussion up one step. Let's assume that we all agree that a peace dividend should be at least recognized. I'm not sure we all agree that it should be paid. You yourself have said a couple of times in your speech that it should be used to reduce the deficit. Yet, at other points in your speech, you have given us any number of suggestions of where the dividend ought to be paid. Those two thoughts don't fit together. I wonder what you would suggest we do with the peace dividend.
Well, I think that I would like to answer that this way. I think that when we can get the dividend, then the discussion will be how will we spend it. Although I think there will be as many ways to spend it as there are people involved in the dialogue. I think if we put it into the deficit, we would reduce interest. That would help the economy. We could put it all in the deficit, and then our children wouldn't be getting more of this education dollars. I think we need to get our communities involved in making the decisions of where that peace dividend will go. That's why we are going to, in this Peace Dividend Task Force, which Multnomah County and the City of Portland have I think, taken a real leadership role in developing this Peace Dividend Task Force. We will have these public meetings, and the public will say where they think the dividend should go. So I don't mean to move around your question, but rather to say it's up to each of us, once we've achieved the dividend, to then be there speaking about how we should spend it.
Jean DeMaster, City Club member. It seems to me that the world has always had this kind of might makes right sort of philosophy from the beginning of people being on the world, and that nuclear weapons have just really accentuated that. Is it really possible to shift the world's thinking to nonviolent conflict resolution? And do you think that the changes in Eastern Europe are indicate that they are steps ahead of where we are in trying to change how we think about resolving problems?
I think it's certainly possible to put the genie back in the box. I think that we definitely can end nuclear weapons. Why? Because we must. Nuclear weapons obviously don't just kill like other weapons do. They destroy all life. It's not a question any longer of can we have them. We must get rid of them. Whether Europe has a better understanding of conflict resolution, I don't know. I would say that they have been at conflict perhaps a little longer than we have. Maybe they've learned a few things. I don't know about that, but I think we will come up with a particularly American way of resolving conflict. I think that we are geniuses in this country. We are the most brilliant group of people who've come up with some wonderful ideas over these few years. But you're right, we've been addicted to might makes right. We have said if we can knock them out, we have a right to what is there. We have to change that thinking, but I have no question that we can do that with officials who will begin to get involved on a local level, as Mayor Agrans, as the City of Portland, as Multnomah County, saying these are local issues. And that's one of the concerns I have about militarizing our economy, is that we get beyond the local. We get into people who, faceless, nameless people who we have no contact with. That's why the Washington delegation has just been turned down by the Pentagon when they asked if they would please remove the Scram-A missiles from Spokane until they could be verified as safe. And the officials who had that responsibility for safety of their own constituents were just turned down flat by the Pentagon, because the Pentagon is not accountable to anyone. Did I answer your question? Thank you.
My name is Dave Olson. I'm a member. In listening to you, Elizabeth, I was thinking of past speakers we've had here, like Lynn Cheney, who is the wife of Dick Cheney, Secretary of Defense, both of them being from Wyoming. And Dick Cheney is concerned about jobs if we cut back the Pentagon budget. And they need lots of jobs in Wyoming. They're in a bust. Then I thought of Jerry Wilson, who was an entrepreneur who started Solaflex, who spoke to the City Club about how we could employ a lot of people building a high-speed railroad, and made a very eloquent case for how this would improve our competitiveness. And I was just thinking, if you could suggest to Dick Cheney they build a high-speed railroad along the UP track in Wyoming, he could see where he could put a lot of people to work. That's what those Irishmen and Chinese did in the early days in Wyoming.
Yes,
what?
and
Question. Sorry.
I saw the question mark. It was out there. It's estimated that for every $1 billion we put into the military, we lose 16,000 jobs. And it's been estimated by the Employment Research Associates from Michigan that Oregon loses 50,000 jobs a year because we are putting our public money into military spending rather than into the kind of spending that would create jobs in Oregon. So I think that Mr. Cheney could look and see that there are lots of employment opportunities in employment that is good for people. And many military jobs are not particularly good for people.
Please join me in thanking Elizabeth Furse. As the president, I guess I always get the last word, and frankly, as somebody who's dealt with government, I'd like to see a little of that dividend in the way of a tax refund for a change. But I suppose that's unrealistic as well. I hope you will all come back next week. We're here at the Benson with David Brewster, and we are adjourned. Thank you.